Have you ever pretended to be something you're not? It can be kind of fun. I mean, actors do it, and they make a living. Halloween is built around this concept. It's really cute when our kids are pretending to be something. It's a way for them to learn and grow and explore. I think the only way I married Jenny was by pretending to be something I'm not. On our first date, she invited me over, and she made enchiladas, which I didn't eat, and Spanish rice, which I didn't eat, and cheesecake, which I didn't eat, and I pretended like it was great. Right? It was wonderful. And so, and I still do it to an extent. You know, we're out riding a camel, and I'm like, oh, everything is great. Love camels. And so you can pretend to be something at times and it be okay. Whenever I was in seminary, we had to practice random things like funerals and weddings, and you couldn't actually get somebody married in seminary class. That'd be weird. And so we had to pretend as though we were doing a real wedding, and she had to make up everything, and it was a tremendous amount of fun. And a friend of mine who I went to seminary with, we actually kind of got in the habit that whenever we were in small groups, we would try to pretend to give a story as if it were our own testimony, when in reality it was a favorite popular song of the day. And the task was to see how long you could carry out that joke before somebody would catch on that this didn't happen to you. And so at work, Jay would say, "Hey, Kevin, why don't you tell that story about that summer?" I said, "Oh, yeah. I went to work for her one summer. I was a teenage kid so far from home, and she was just a lowly widowed woman trying to, make it on her own. We were 1,000 miles from nowhere, just as far as the wheat fields the eye could see, and both needing something from each other, but just not quite knowing what that might be. Till she came to me one evening, a hot cup of coffee and a smile." You get the rest. And so I was hoping I'd laugh a little bit more than that a little bit earlier so I could cut that off. Y'all were kind of luring me in going, how far will he take this joke at this moment? Have you ever tried to pretend to be something that you're not? It can be fun. Have you ever had somebody else pretend to be something that they're not? That's not nearly as fun. A business partner that you thought really cared for you, who is really out to get you. A spouse, a dating partner that you thought had your best intention at heart. But Tricia Yearwood warned you. That boy's just a walk-away Joe, born to believer, tell you from the word go, destined to deceive you. He's the wrong kind of paradise. She's going to know it in a matter of time. That boy's just a walk-away Joe. And yet I had to have somebody else read the text for me. It's scary whenever somebody else pretends to be something that they're not. It can deceive us. It can hurt us. Jesus in this text is warning us that not every person who proclaims to be of God is actually from God. And he tells us that we must show a tremendous amount of discernment to make sure that we are not led astray and literally led to our own destruction now, because the person that we are following that we think is sent from God is actually not of God. The person that we think is serving us is actually there to use us and to abuse us. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is now laying out his kingdom ethic. He is showing us in many ways what it means to be a child of God, to produce the kind of life that we're called to produce, to be the type of people that we're called to be, to align ourselves now with the things of God. And in the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, he warns us on two different occasions. He uses the word beware. Well, that should immediately cause us to begin to pay attention. If Jesus himself is saying, now watch out for this. And we would assume in that moment that what he's going to say is, beware of those evil people who are out there. Beware of the terrorists. Beware of the bad politicians. Beware of the governments. Beware of the nefarious people. We expect him to now warn us of these great outward threats and to unify us now as a church, as a body of Christ, to know that we got to stay unified against the great dangers that are outside of us. Instead, both times that Jesus says beware in the Sermon on the Mount, the threats that he tells us to beware about are not external threats, but internal threats. He says in chapter 6 and verse number 1, beware of practicing your righteousness in front of other people. There's a temptation that we have. Humanity has this temptation now to show off in some way, to take our spirituality, to take our faith, and not to press it deep down into who we actually are, to be transformed into Christ's likeness so that we can follow after Jesus, but instead to wear it as a badge of honor, to show off to other people, to prove to other people that we are righteous, that we are worthy, without ever making true in any internal transformation of ourselves. Jesus says, beware of that. Billy Graham says that one of the greatest regrets that he had of his entire ministry was the very first time he got invited to the White House. He went and saw the president, obviously in private, had a nice one-on-one meeting with him, and as he was leaving, some reporters said, "Hey, Billy, would you kneel down here outside the White House and pray so we can take your picture?" Billy, now ignorant of the media ways, knelt down and prayed. And the next day, the president woke up and saw Billy Graham kneeling down in front of the White House. And the president said, "I will never invite that guy back to the White House for as long as I'm in office." He was used. Prayer is not meant to be a photo op. And yet the media used him right there. And Billy didn't have the discernment that he needed in that moment to be used by the media. And he said, "I will never do that again. I will meet with every president. But I will never again try to use it as a way to extend my ministry, as a way to kind of show off in some way." There is a temptation within humanity to use our faith and to wear it as a badge, to try to prove how holy or righteous or good we are, to try to justify to ourselves that we are something that we're not. But yet the second beware comes in chapter 7 and verse number 15, where Jesus says, "Beware of false prophets. For though they come in sheep's clothing, they are ravenous as wolves." Beware of false prophets. What he's saying in that moment is be very careful who you follow. That as a follower of Jesus, as a person of God, you're gonna choose to put people in your life. You're called to now submit yourself to other people who are now teaching you, who are instructing you, and you better be very careful of who you choose to submit yourself to. Now, one, you have to submit yourself. You can't do this on your own. Church was never meant to be just individual, all by yourself. You can't just watch it in isolation and live out your faith. Church is called to be in community. We're called to live our Christian lives in the midst of community. But he says, be very careful to whom you submit yourself. Because not everybody who gives the appearance of being a follower of God, not every teacher actually has your best intent and your best purpose at heart. Beware of these false prophets. You know, if these men or women just showed up and they had a badge that said false prophet, and they said, "Hey, I'm showing up to use you so I can get money out of you or build my own ego based on you," then they would be really easy not to follow. But it doesn't work that way. The text says they show up in sheep's clothing, unassuming, approachable, something that we would be drawn to. And yet the truth of who they actually are is concealed. So they give out these outward appearance of godliness, of success, of faithfulness, of obedience, but internally their actual desire is not for your benefit, it's not for your good, it's not about your actual heart. Instead, they're trying to use you in the moment to justify their own sins, use you in the moment to get money out of you, to get resources out of you, to build up who they actually are. And Jesus says, if you're not very careful, you will unintentionally begin to follow people who are actually meant for your destruction. Well, how could that happen? How could we actually submit ourselves to someone who wants what's worst for us? How could we actually begin to follow poor leaders? How does that actually happen? It happens because they're savvy, because they're good. They don't show up on the scene and say, "I want your money." They so study you to figure out what it is that you want, what it is that you desire, that they begin to speak into those things, to lure you in, to draw you in. They'll never confront the sin in your life. That hurts too much. It's too much of a rub. It's too much of a challenge. And so they'll confront the sins of your enemies. And they'll say, well, that activity is wrong. And you'll say, "Yeah, that's wrong." And then they'll begin to encourage you and begin to lead you astray into believing that some things are maybe possible for you that maybe aren't God's design or intention for you whatsoever. And in America, it's the prosperity gospel. They'll come in the sheep's clothing of the prosperity gospel, of making it you believe that God is solely about your physical and your financial health right now. And if you would just pray enough and believe enough and maybe sow seed into my ministry, then God will allow you to flourish. They begin in America to model it after the American dream and kind of intertwine the two of those things, never challenging your own heart in any way, never even beginning to pretend that maybe God desires for you to be in a place of ministry that you don't want to be. Maybe God allowed your life to take a drastic turn so it could impact the lives of other people. Instead, they make it feel like that God just wants what I want. And we begin to follow them. And before we even recognize it, their true intentions begin to be made known in our lives. And Jesus says, watch out. Be careful about your leaders. Be careful about who you submit to. Be careful about your pastors. But it's interesting that he says this here in chapter 7 and verse number 15, because chapter 7 and verse number 1 begins with these words, judge not. Judge not unless you're judged. And so we begin with this great teaching of you and I are not called to judge, that because of what God has done within our own lives, we are never to look at the life of somebody else and to say you have no value, you have no worth, your past will forever define you. We are never supposed to judge other people, but at the same time, God then does call us to be discerning in who it is that we submit to. Well, how do we obey both those commands at the same time? And notice, in our minds, there's a conflict there. In our minds, judge not is this all-encompassing concept that now we don't even have the ability to discern it in any way. Many people have taken this command to judge not, and they have swung the pendulum so far one way that either you have no right or ability to ever mention sin in any way whatsoever, or it is the concept that everything is condemned, and it's our job to speak truth about everything that is wrong. Whereas the truth is somewhere in the middle, that judge not means that I cannot set myself up above somebody else and use their faults and their sins and their mistakes as a way to make myself feel good, to press them down and to make me feel good. And yet, while I can't judge them, I can and need to be discerning in trying to figure out how to best interact with them, and trying to figure out who among us, what is the voice among us that we need to listen to, that we need to follow, that not everybody's opinion is equal. Everybody has an equal right to an opinion, but not every opinion is equal based on the topic of what's going on. Whenever we set boundaries around our kids and say, all right, you got to follow these boundaries or you're not going to work with our kids. If somebody fails to do that and we remove from them the ability to be with our kids, that's not judging. That's discerning. And we're not saying you're useless and worthless, you're outside the kingdom of God, God can never redeem you in any way. We're not making ourselves feel better because of what's going on. No. But we are saying what's in the best interest of our kids? What's in the best interest of you as an individual? If you have a past of making poor decisions with kids, you're not going to be allowed in this hallway. That's not us judging you, that's us protecting you and trying to help you and to assist you. What this text shows us is that yes, we are not supposed to judge other people, to put ourselves up above other people, to make ourselves feel good by putting other people down. But we are to be discerning in figuring out who is it that we're going to follow, who is it we're going to trust, who is it we're going to believe, who is it that we're going to put in positions of authority and power over us, who are we going to submit our lives and our family to. And what Jesus said here is there is a real temptation to begin to follow the wrong people. And so often the reason we follow them is because they're telling us what we want them to tell us. You know, one of the great signs of a loving pastor, of somebody you can truly follow, is somebody who's willing to speak the truth to you even when it hurts, even when it rubs the relationship the wrong way. I don't want a doctor that every time I walk in the room, he goes, looks great. What good is that? I mean, I'm not paying $150 for you to tell me I look good. Like, I'll get that from home, right? Like, yeah. If Jenny were here, she'd like, it costs you a whole lot more than $150. No, whenever I walk in, I want him to say some things that are good, like butter me up and say, all right, hey, you're doing really good over here. You might need to lose a few pounds, but you're doing really good over here, right? But then I need him to speak truth. And if there's something in my life that is cancerous to me, I need him to be willing to inflict pain in my life. I need her to be willing to take the scalpel to my life, to remove from me, to go through a horrible experience in the moment, to remove from me that which could be damaging to me in the long haul. As it is with doctors, so it is with spiritual leaders, so it is with pastors. If I never do anything but speak the words that you like, I'm failing you. And I need to do better than that. I need to be better than that. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that whenever I speak something that hurts you that I'm right. I could be wrong. I think in part this is one of the reasons that the average pastorate is 4.5 years. Y'all are like, well, we're overdue. 4.5 years. Why is that? Well, I think because about 3 years in, you begin to figure out the sinfulness of the pastor, and the pastor begins to figure out they know my weaknesses. And the pastor begins to know the weaknesses of the congregation. And the reality is we have a choice in that moment. Either we can keep on pretending and have this pseudo relationship where we all kind of pretend to get along and there's nothing really wrong, or we can deal with the actual issues. We can deal with the actual sin that's in the camp, the sin that's in your life, the sin that's in my life, or we can also begin to deal with, you know what, these are some weaknesses. Your personality, your who you are has these strengths, but alongside it has these weaknesses, and we're just going to appreciate who you are as a whole person, and that's just the reality. Congregations have strengths and weaknesses. We're just going to appreciate who you are as a whole congregation, and we're going to live in the messiness of life, or if we don't like that, we're just going to move on. And sometimes churches move their pastors on, and sometimes pastors move themselves on. And the reality is you have this constant, never-ending cycle of pastors that go in and out. Why? Because they never want to really deal with the messiness of humanity. And notice here with these false prophets, they come in among you. There's this itinerant nature of false prophets. So they never really let you see their life. They never really reveal who they actually are. They're there. They have these great strengths, these tremendous spiritual gifts. They can maybe draw great crowds, preach great sermons, tell you what it is that you want to hear, but you never really have the time to test, are they living this out in their real life? And then they're gone. I think that's God's beautiful design of the church. Is you're not going to get the best preaching in the nation in this place. You may not even get the best preaching in town. You may not even get the best preaching on the street, depending on who's preaching across the street today. Be funny to find out now. But what are you supposed to get? You're supposed to get a real person where you know my weaknesses and my flaws, and you have every right to confront me whenever I've wronged you. And then whenever I have wronged you, do I begin to live out the way of Jesus? Do I show humility, accountability? Am I willing to listen? Are we willing to work it out, to struggle, to figure it out, to fight it out, to then be in the right relationship? Notice what Jesus says here. Beware of false prophets who come among you in sheep's clothing, even though their heart is ravenous wolves. So how is it that we're supposed to beware? He says, look at their fruit. He gives an illustration. He said, look at their fruit. Now, notice what he doesn't say here. Look at their giftedness. He could have said that. Beware of false prophets who come among you. They come in sheep's clothing, even though they're ravenous wolves. And so inspect their giftedness. Are they really skilled? Are they really talented? Can they really do the things that you think a pastor or a minister is supposed to do, and then follow those people? It doesn't say that. Why? Because you can fake those things. Just because you're gifted does not mean you're of God. Just because you're getting these outward signs of things that are going on does not mean you have a heart from God. Instead, Jesus says, inspect their fruit. He says a diseased tree cannot produce good fruit. A healthy tree produces good fruit. And so look at the fruit in their lives. Well, what's the fruit? He doesn't say. He doesn't say. So what is it? If it's not the giftedness, the skills, the aptitudes, the talents, the abilities, if it is the internal character of what's going on, if your apple tree isn't producing healthy apples, you don't go yell at the tree to produce better fruit. Instead, you look at the conditions. How are the leaves? How are the limbs? How is I can't remember the parts of a tree. How are the roots of what's going on? How's the soil that's all around? You begin to look at all the conditions that are there to see about the health of the tree. If you can get the health of the tree right, the fruit of the tree will be right. And so what is the fruit of our lives? We just got out of Galatians. That could be helpful. Paul says the fruit of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience and kindness and goodness, faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. And so as you look at who you want to follow, you begin to ask questions. Is that person loving? Not just when they're on stage. Do they love their wife, their kids? Do they love people that don't look like them, that are different than them? Do they love people who have different ideologies, different political preferences, different theological preferences? Is there a joy about them? Even in the midst of the hardships of life, there's this sense of godly expectation? Is there a peace about them? In the midst of the chaos, do they have this sense of stability that's there? Is there a patience? Because of what God has done in their lives, or are they patient with people whenever they sin? And whenever they're having the same conversation over and over again, is there this concept of goodness about them? Not that they're perfect. Are they faithful? Consistently, not just fruitful, but now faithful and believing God. Is there a gentleness that kind of symbolizes the way of Jesus? Is there now a sense of self-control? In many ways, I think, and I love the internet, and I love podcasts, but this is the reason that church leadership, that preaching is a physical thing. You're supposed to be able to see it. Even in a big room, and rooms bigger than this, you're supposed to be able to have the opportunity to watch me interact with my wife. That not that I'm going to be perfect in any way whatsoever, but that generally speaking, I'm loving toward her. To watch me interact with my children, even in the midst of difficult times, even while you and I are trying to have maybe a very hard conversation out in the foyer. How is it that I respond to my children as they're running around me saying, is it time to go eat yet? You're supposed to see in the hardships of my own life, am I faithful or not? That is there a basic goodness or not? Is there a gentleness or not? Is there a growing sense of self-control? You can fake that online so easily. It's why we got to be very careful. I feel like I'm discipled by men and women online, that there are preachers and teachers that I follow, that I listen to, that I would recommend to you all day long. Yesterday on the way to a wedding, I'm listening to Matt Chandler. I'm reading a book by Tim Keller. I'm listening to Beth Moore. These are great people. Follow them all day long. But you got to be careful about others because they don't have your best interest at heart. And you can't really know them up close to see them and how they're interacting. We know some of them that you want to stay 1,000 miles away from. We're not judging them as evil. We're not saying they're outside of the possibility of God's redemption. We're not saying that at all. We are discerning now to say you don't want to follow Kenneth Copeland or Paula White or Benny Hinn. You got to be a little bit careful with Joyce Myers and Joel Osteen. No, they're not bad. Just be careful. But there are other people that we can stamp our name to, but generally the church is meant to be a physical thing where you get to interact with me and see me. Beware of these false prophets. This text has a tremendous warning for us, for you, and for me, and it's different. The warning for me is, Kevin, do not become a false prophet. And here's the reality. There are some false prophets who start off with that mindset. They know from the get-go, this is just a scam. I know how to manipulate people. I know how to scheme people. And so I'm going to use my persona and my personality, and I'm going to make all these great promises. And in so doing, I'm going to become rich doing that. There are some people who start that way. That's not me. I don't have the persona. I don't have the personality. I don't have the charisma. That's not me. But there is a temptation here. And the temptation from Psalm is as the weight of ministry gets upon you, and as you're living life, as the demands are present, you become so concerned with your own spiritual giftedness and the machine that you're supposed to keep on operating that you begin to neglect your spiritual heart. And very slowly, very subtly, who you project to be and who you actually are become two different people. And it's really not until the major fall happens that you even can see what happens. This text is a warning to me of, Kevin, do not become that. This text is a warning to you of be very careful who you follow. You're not in search of a perfect person, but you are in search of a person who desires to walk with God, who desires what is in your best interest and your best heart, who is accountable, who has a humility about him or her that whenever they fail, they can be confronted in that moment. Whenever they hear the call of God, they're willing to answer it in that moment. Sometimes I just entertain myself. You have to be very careful of who you follow, but there's a secondary understanding to this text that I think you need to understand. You got to be very careful not to believe the false prophet, but you also have to be careful not to become the false prophet. Because you are testifying that you're a follower of Jesus. If you are a follower, if you are willing to say, I'm a follower of Jesus, there's a command of God upon you now, not just to have a personal relationship with him, although that's true. There's also a command of you that you're supposed to make disciples, that you're now supposed to testify to the goodness, to the hope that now dwells within you, that you're to now proclaim the goodness of God. And just by the life that you live, the words that you actually say, there are many people in this community that will never meet me, and the only preacher they will ever have is you. Lord, help them. You're it. And so are you now a true prophet? Are you truly proclaiming the truths of the gospel of Jesus Christ, or have you become a false prophet? Well, you say, Kevin, how do I know? I don't understand all this. I don't comprehend all this, and that's fine. But the question is, are you living out the gospel of Jesus Christ, or some kind of Americanized, Arkansan kind of manipulated belief that really kind of resembles Christianity in this region, but has nothing to do with Jesus? Do you truly believe the gospel of Jesus Christ, that I am without hope and without God, I stand in desperate need of God's grace, that my life is nothing but God's grace, and I now live my life in response to everything that God has done for me, and the gospel now provides a perspective on every aspect of life, of my politics, of my money, of my time, of my parenting, of my marriage, of every aspect of my life. I am now trying to understand what it means to follow Jesus in that moment. Or are you living a life of, well, Jesus just loves me and agrees with me, and so he must think like I think and believe like I believe. And you're never really dealing with your own sin or confronting your own actions. You're judging other people and feeling good about you're not as bad as they are. Exactly what the Pharisees did. And you're proclaiming to everybody else, this is what the gospel's all about. You need to become more like me. In that moment, you're a false prophet. Well, how can we know the difference? We'll look at the fruit. A healthy tree produces good fruit. A diseased tree produces bad fruit. How's your fruit? Not that it's perfect, but generally speaking, are you humble? Are you humble enough to recognize that you don't know it all, that you don't have it all, but that God has called you, and there's a circle and a sphere of influence, and so now you're trying to figure it out? Are you teachable? Are you growing in the knowledge of who God is? Even though you're not quite where you want to be, but at least you're not where you were. Because of what God has done for you, are you more loving? Loving toward those who are closest to you? That if it wasn't for Jesus, your marriage wouldn't be as good as it is. Or your parenting wouldn't be exactly like it is. Not perfect, but it's impacting it. Loving people who are far from you. That apart from Jesus, you would judge them and look down on them and build yourself up based on them. But because of Jesus now, you recognize that though you disagree in ideology or politics, that there's an appreciation there. Are you more loving? Is there a joy in your life? Is there this general sense when life takes a turn you don't expect that you can lean into it and go, all right, God, I can't wait to see what you're going to do here. I know based on what you've done in the past, I know you're going somewhere here, and so here we go. Is there a sense of expectation in that? Is that resonating in your heart? Is there a peace about you? That when life is chaotic, because you trust in the sovereignty of God, there is this sense of stability, not imperfection, but this sense of wholeness. Are you more patient because you've experienced the patience of God? And looking at what Jesus did for you on the cross, looking at this long-suffering nature of God, allows you to be patient with other people when they continue to struggle in the midst of their addictions and their failures and their sins? Are you kind? That apart from Jesus, there would be a harshness. But because of him, there is a genuine kindness, that you care for people. Are you good? Not in totality. But generally speaking, if people pressed into who you are, if they knew more about you than what they know now, would they be just a little bit more impressed? That there is a sense of goodness? Are you faithful? That in the midst of life's circumstances that you believe and you trust, and you're not perfect, but even whenever you're not perfect, you handle those sins in the right way and you repent and you come back to God and you desire now this goodness about you. And God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to plant my feet now on your word and trust that you're in charge, and no matter what comes my way, I'm on your side. Is there a gentleness about you that apart from Jesus just wouldn't be? I don't just mean a gentleness with your grandkids. I mean a gentleness with that guy at work. You know that guy at work, right? No? No, you are him. And so you know, but because of what God has done for you on the cross, that it doesn't mean you back down. There's a strength about you. But now whenever he begins to be him, you give him a way out to where he can still have his pride and not have to just tuck tail and run. And in your gentleness, you allow him. Is there a growing sense of self-control in your life? That, you know what, man, a year ago, I would have done this. But now I can actually restrain that. Or when I blow it now, used to whenever I blow it, I wouldn't even recognize it. Now when I blow it, I see it. Well, that's progress. Conviction of the Spirit. Is there any fruit in your life that begins to testify that there is a growing sense of health in the tree of your faith? Now don't diminish it. If it's small, don't diminish it. I remember when Ella was born, Jenny would always have these big gardens. I mean, it wasn't big in comparison to what she grew up with, but any garden was big in comparison to what I grew up. And what's the use of a garden? You'd have to eat that stuff, and who wants to eat that stuff, right? And so, but when Ella was born, it was summertime of July, and so the garden was in full bloom, if gardens bloom. But Jenny was, she was busy. And so I would go out at night and water the garden. And what I used to not even do at all, and Elle was born, it became very cathartic. I just kind of loved to water the garden. And there was a lot going on, a lot to process. And one night I'm out there watering the garden, and I see something. It looks like a grape. And I'm like, what? Is this a vineyard now? Thompson Vintage 2005? I don't even drink. And so I pick it up, and I see it's a watermelon. It was that big. It was a joke of a watermelon, right? And I thought, how funny is that? I didn't even know watermelons could grow that small, right? And so as a gardener in that moment, I look at that watermelon, and I think, well, that's pretty impressive she grew a watermelon. We can't do anything about it. You just kind of throw it aside, but it's impressive that she grew a watermelon, but it's insignificant to us. As a pastor, when I see the small fruit in your life, that's not insignificant to me. It's meaningful. It means God's at work within you. And sometimes it can be so small we don't even recognize it. And we see the fruit of other people, and we want to be like that. We wish we could be like that. And it causes us to look at our little small steps of faith. Just the sense that I now feel a little bit of conviction for what I did. That's not what I need to be. I want to be in a space where I'm not even doing those things anymore. But no. Don't downplay the fruit in your life. Don't downplay the fact that you do love a little bit more than you used to love. That there is a sense of joy about you that you would have never had before. for, that there is a peace, even though it isn't always there. You can center yourself back to it, that there is a patience about us, a goodness, a kindness, a gentleness, a faithfulness, that there is a little bit of growing sense of self-control about that. Because here's the beautiful thing. If there's no watermelon in the garden whatsoever, it can be very difficult to grow them. But if you can grow a small watermelon, it's pretty easy to get the conditions right to make it grow, to make it bigger. If there's a little bit of love in your life, if there's a little bit of joy, a little bit of peace, a little bit of patience, of goodness, of kindness, of gentleness, of faithfulness, of self-control, if there's a little bit of a step, it means you're going in the right direction. And we can help you. We can assist you. We can change the conditions that are going on around you. We can put some steroids in there, some fertilizer in there to begin to grow even more what God is doing within your life. Is there anything taking place in your life? If it is, we can build on it. If there's not, watch out. Watch out. I don't care how many Sundays you attend. I don't care how much you serve. I don't care the persona that you have with everybody else. I don't care how beautiful your prayer is or was at Thanksgiving or Christmas. If you're not loving people more because of Jesus, if there's not this sense of hope because of Jesus, if the cross isn't convicting you and changing you in any way, God is not in you. And you can pretend all day long that you were a follower of Jesus, but you're not. And what this text says is, in the end, you'll just be cast aside in the fire. But there is an invitation today to anybody who wants to be different, to anybody that wants to live a life that produces true spiritual fruit. God can make himself available to you today. I told you at the end of last year that I went to get a physical. It's what you do this time of year whenever you're 42, right? And so you go in and get a physical, and they can show me all my numbers, and the numbers are good, but the numbers are byproducts. The numbers are byproducts of how I'm living. And so if the doctor looks at a number and says, hey, this one needs to change, I can't just fixate on the number. I can't wake up every morning going, well, what's my cholesterol today? Can I change it? No. You look at your habits. What is it you're eating? How's your exercise? How's your sleep? And if you can change these things, these numbers will begin to follow, right? What if we had a spiritual physical today? How's your spiritual health? Let's look at the numbers of your love, your joy, your patience, your peace, your kindness, your yada yada self-control. How is it? Are some of the numbers good? Some of the numbers in need of help? Okay. It doesn't mean that you're then now, all right, I need to work harder on being more patient. I'm going to become really, really patient this year. No. No, these are byproducts. This is what the tree is producing. Let's look at the condition of the tree. How's your prayer life? If I go to my doctor, he's going to start asking questions. If the numbers are bad, he's going to start asking questions. Let's talk about what you're eating. What's your nutrition like? What about your exercise? What about your sleep? Okay. How's your spiritual nutrition? What's going to be your diet this year? Are you going to be discipled by Fox News or MSNBC? Or by God's Word? Do you think that will affect the numbers? Love or fear? Which fruit is in your life? Love or fear? Kindness or harshness with the other side? Which is in your life? Well, what's your nutrition? What is it that you're taking in? Kevin, you can't lower your cholesterol if 3 days a week you're going to Geno's. I'll be there in 15 minutes. 1 day a week. Well, what's your exercise like? Now, all right, this year, what is it that you're going to now spend your energy on? Where is it that you're going to serve? Who's the community you're going to surround your life with that you're guaranteed in the midst of that diverse community that at some point you're going to do wrong? You're going to offend somebody, you're going to say the wrong thing in some way, and in that moment, when everybody else changes churches or changes groups or just steps out, in that moment, you're going to have a chance to live out, to actually get on the spiritual treadmill in that moment and do some work, to admit that you're wrong, to do the ugliness of the frustration of the relationship where I have to say, well, here's what I did wrong, and here's what you did wrong, now how do we make it right in some way, and to still keep on showing up and to be in relationship with one another. What's your exercise going to be this year? Who are the group of people that you're going to spend life? I guarantee you, anybody that comes to Celebrate Recovery and involves themselves in a small group and really dives in, doesn't fake it, but really dives in and says, here are my issues, and becomes transparent with a small group of people. If you do that for 2 years, I guarantee you will not be the same person. I guarantee it. I guarantee you, anybody who commits to a discipleship group and actually does the reading, not just fakes it, not just shows up and says the answers that you think somebody wants to hear, but actually consistently reads God's word over a period of time, over 2 years, you will be in a different spot. I guarantee it. But we don't like that. Why? You know the problem with fruit? It takes time and faith. It takes time and faith. You know the skill of the false prophets is they show up and make you believe it will take no effort and no time. If you will just give me money, if you'll just pray this prayer, if you'll just do this thing, then man, your miracle's coming. No, it's not. But if you will trust Jesus and begin to look at your own spiritual health and get close to him in his word, in worship, through other people, in service, if you will allow him to begin to penetrate your life, I guarantee you a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, you will not even begin to recognize what your life is producing in the love and joy and the peace and the patience and the kindness and the goodness and the gentleness and the faithfulness and the self-control. But it takes time, it takes effort, it takes faith. I wonder today, will God find us faithful? Would you bow your heads in prayer with me?